Hollywood blockbusters and popular history books have long focused on a specific image of the Great Pyramid's construction, a brutal scene of countless slaves pulling massive stones under the punishing crack of a whip. And then there are the internet theories. When people look at a monument built with such overwhelming precision, it is common to assume extraterrestrial intervention or the use of lost ancient magic. These stories persist because the unfathomable scale of the pyramids creates a vacuum of understanding. When faced with an achievement that seems impossible for Bronze Age humans, we naturally fill that gap with fantasy. This confusion is aided by the fact that the historical accounts we often rely on are secondary. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote his famous description of the construction 2,000 years after the stones were actually laid. However, we are currently in an archaeological revolution. By using particle physics to scan the interior, translating newly recovered logbooks, and excavating lost cities buried in the sand, researchers are replacing those old myths with hard data. The emerging truth suggests the pyramids were achieved through a sophisticated level of human civic organization and rigorous applied science. To understand the builders' success, we have to look past the idea that they relied on primitive guesswork. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north, south, east, and west within a fraction of a single degree, a feat achieved thousands of years before the invention of the magnetic compass. Royal engineers, known as the stretchers of the cord, accomplished this by tracking the night sky. Using specialized sighting tools like the Bay and the Mercat, they observed the imperishable stars, the northern stars that rotate around the celestial pole but never set. They used a specific geometric method. By recording exactly where a star rose and where it set on the horizon, they could bisect the angle between those points. This allowed them to establish a perfect north-south baseline directly on the ground. Today, researchers are matching that ancient observational science with high-tech tools. By tracking muons, harmless byproducts of cosmic rays that pass through stone, scientists recently mapped a massive, previously unknown void hidden deep inside the structure. The monument's perfection is the result of rigorous applied mathematics and observational science. Even with perfect alignment, there is still the question of moving 91 million cubic feet of stone. We often imagine men dragging massive blocks endlessly across a dry, barren desert landscape. The physical evidence shatters that image. In 2013, archaeologists uncovered the Wadi al-Jarf papyri, a 4,600-year-old diary written by a project manager named Inspector Merer. Merer's logbook is a boatman's ledger. It details how his crew of 40 workers transported the fine white Tora limestone used for the pyramid's outer casing. They moved the stones via watercraft, not land. This map shows how that was possible. The Egyptians dredged an intricate network of artificial canals and created a basin known as the Lake of Khufu. This maritime infrastructure allowed barges to float heavy blocks right up to the base of the plateau. The pyramid's supply chain was a triumph of hydrological engineering and maritime logistics, avoiding the friction of the desert sand entirely. This evidence brings us to the belief that the pyramids were built by a disposable slave class. Just south of the Sphinx, archaeologists excavated a site called Hayt el Gharab, or the Lost City. It was a highly structured, permanent urban center built specifically to house and support the pyramid workforce. The labor operated under a system called bak, a feudal obligation where citizens provided service to the state as a form of social duty or tax. This was a corvée workforce, often drafted during the months when the Nile flooded and farming was impossible. To maintain this force, the state provided a diet rich in protein. Records show the daily slaughter of 4,000 pounds of meat, totaling over 21,000 cattle and 54,000 sheep and goats driven in from across the Nile Delta. They were also treated as valuable assets. Skeletal remains reveal healed fractures and successful bone settings. There is even evidence of a worker surviving brain surgery and living for years afterward. When they died, many were granted the honor of being buried in a dedicated cemetery located in the sacred shadow of the pharaoh's monument. The builders were a highly valued, well-fed workforce, participating in a prestigious national duty. When we strip away the myths, the Great Pyramid emerges as a Bronze Age public works project manned by a massive, organized society. Leading archaeologists now argue the project functioned as a massive socio-political engine. Managing a project of this magnitude required a leap in administrative power. To deliver thousands of cattle and move limestone blocks daily, the state had to develop the infrastructure to collect taxes, map distant provinces, and control the food supply across hundreds of miles of the Nile. This logistical pressure effectively forced isolated farming villages to integrate into a single, centralized bureaucracy for the first time. The logistical crucible of Giza forged the disparate communities of the Nile into the unified nation of ancient Egypt.